The morning started like any other as Lena and Michael drove through winding roads that led into the remote countryside. They had been married for 12 years, and though life had presented its challenges, especially after the accident that left Lena in a wheelchair, their love had always been steady, reliable. Michael was her rock, the one who had always been there for her, lifting her when her spirit fell, pushing her forward when she thought she couldn't go on. She trusted him implicitly, believing that as long as they were together, they could face anything. The journey was supposed to be a simple trip to explore a quiet, scenic village on the outskirts, far removed from the noise and bustle of their city life. Michael had mentioned wanting to show her a special place, a place of peace and beauty. He had been oddly secretive about it, brushing off her questions with a reassuring smile and a promise that it would be worth it. Lena, curious but reassured by his confidence, had agreed. She had no reason to doubt him, no reason to believe that this day would be anything other than another adventure together. The village was quaint, almost frozen in time, with cobblestone paths, rustic houses, and a serenity that felt like stepping into a storybook. But as they walked, or rather, as Michael pushed her along in her wheelchair, Lena began to feel a strange unease. There was an unfamiliar look in Michael's eyes, something distant, almost troubled. When she asked if something was wrong, he simply smiled, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and reassured her that everything was fine. After a while, Michael suggested they sit near an old, isolated park on the outskirts of the village. The trees cast long shadows over them, and the sound of distant birds was the only noise breaking the stillness. They sat in silence, Lena sensing that Michael was struggling with something he wasn't telling her. She reached for his hand, hoping to offer comfort, but he pulled away, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Then, without warning, he stood up, his eyes filled with an intensity she had never seen before. He mumbled something about needing to check on something in the car and walked off. Lena watched as he disappeared down the narrow, winding path. At first, she assumed he would be back in a few minutes, that he was just acting a bit strange, due to some stress he hadn't shared with her. But as the minutes stretched on, a sinking feeling settled in her chest. She glanced around, taking in the quiet, almost eerie emptiness of the place. She was alone, utterly alone, with no one in sight. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting an orange glow over the village. Lena's worry grew into panic as she realized that Michael was not coming back. She tried to calm herself, convincing herself that there must be a reasonable explanation. Maybe he had run into some trouble with the car or had gone to get help. But as time continued to pass, her hope began to fade. She was miles from home, stranded in a place where she knew no one, and confined to her wheelchair, with limited ability to move or seek help on her own. Her mind raced, questioning every moment that had led up to this. Had there been signs she missed, warnings that Michael had been planning something? She thought back to the days and weeks leading up to this trip. Michael had been distant lately, his mind elsewhere, but she had assumed it was just work-related stress. She hadn't pressed him, wanting to respect his privacy, but now, sitting alone as the shadows grew longer, she felt a bitter sting of regret. She had trusted him without question, without ever considering that he might one day leave her in such a cold, unforgiving way. As night began to fall, Lena's fear turned to a survival instinct. She knew she couldn't stay there. She had to find shelter, food, anything to get her through the night. She wheeled herself slowly along the path, her arms aching as she pushed through the uneven terrain. Every sound, every rustle in the bushes, filled her with dread. She was vulnerable, exposed, and every step forward was a struggle against her growing sense of despair. Eventually, after what felt like hours, she managed to reach a small house on the edge of the village. A kindly old woman answered the door, her face lined with the wisdom and hardship of a lifetime. The woman took one look at Lena and understood that she was in distress. Without a word, she helped Lena inside, offering her food and a place to rest. Lena, exhausted and emotionally shattered, could barely manage a thank you before collapsing into a fitful sleep, haunted by thoughts of betrayal and abandonment. The next morning, Lena woke to the quiet murmur of village life outside the window. The woman who had taken her in, whose name was Anna, sat by her side, offering her a comforting presence. Over breakfast, Lena shared what had happened, though her words were halting and filled with pain. Anna listened patiently, her gaze sympathetic yet tinged with a sadness that hinted at a deep understanding of betrayal. Days turned into weeks as Lena adjusted to her new reality. She was a stranger in a foreign place, reliant on the kindness of people she had never met. The villagers, though initially wary, gradually warmed up to her as they learned her story. Some pitied her, others judged her, and a few questioned the real reasons behind her husband's sudden disappearance. Rumors spread, each one more elaborate than the last. Some claimed he had run away with another woman, while others whispered about debts he couldn't repay. But no one, least of all Lena, knew the truth. As time went on, Lena found herself growing stronger, both physically and mentally. She adapted to her surroundings, learning to navigate the village's narrow, uneven paths, relying on her inner strength to survive. She built a small support system among the villagers, particularly Anna, who became like a surrogate mother to her, and Rafik, an older man who offered her sage advice, but seemed to know more than he let on. Yet, despite the new connection she formed, the sense of betrayal lingered, haunting her in quiet moments when she was alone. She could never shake the image of Michael walking away, leaving her vulnerable and helpless. She had once believed their love was unbreakable, that no matter what life threw at them, they would face it together. But now, that belief felt like a cruel illusion, a story she had told herself to ignore the cracks that had been forming for years. Then, one evening, as Lena sat by the fire in Anna's home, Rafik came to visit. He sat across from her, his eyes filled with a strange intensity. After a long silence, he finally spoke, his words measured and filled with a weight that sent chills down Lena's spine. He revealed that he had known Michael years ago, in a different life, under different circumstances. Michael, he claimed, was not the man Lena thought he was. He hinted at secrets, at choices that Michael had made long before he had met Lena, choices that could have led him to this drastic, heartbreaking decision. Lena sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling from the revelation. Rafik's words cast her husband in a new, disturbing light, and she wondered if she had ever truly known him at all. As she looked into the flickering flames, a new determination took hold of her. She needed to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And in that moment, she knew that her journey was far from over. The days in the village were long and challenging. Each morning, Lena woke with a surge of dread, haunted by questions that seemed to have no answers. Why had Michael done this to her? Why bring her to this remote, unforgiving place, only to abandon her so callously? The agony of betrayal was unlike anything she had ever felt. It was a deep, gnawing emptiness that threatened to consume her, filling her days with sorrow and her nights with restless, fitful dreams. Yet, despite the pain, there was something else simmering beneath the surface, an ember of resilience, a tiny spark of determination that refused to be extinguished. Survival had become her focus. Without any means to leave or even communicate with the outside world, Lena had no choice but to rely on the villagers around her. Her physical limitations, once a burden she shared with Michael's unwavering support, now became a challenge she had to face alone. Anna, the elderly woman who had first taken her in, had continued to show kindness and care, helping her with daily tasks and teaching her the ways of the village. Anna was patient, offering Lena a comforting presence during the moments when grief and anger threatened to overwhelm her. But the village itself was a place of mystery, a community bound together by generations of shared stories and whispered secrets. Lena began to notice how the villagers watched her, eyes flickering with curiosity, pity, and sometimes suspicion. Conversations would pause when she entered a room, and people seemed reluctant to meet her gaze. Some offered words of kindness, while others avoided her altogether, as if she were an unwelcome ghost haunting their peaceful lives. It wasn't long before the rumors began. Lena could hear them in passing, fragments of conversation that floated through the narrow alleyways and quiet homes of the village. They spoke of Michael in hushed tones, speculating about his reasons for leaving her behind. Some said he had left to escape a debt he couldn't repay. Others believed he had run off with another woman, while a few claimed he had simply grown tired of caring for his disabled wife. The stories were as varied as they were painful, each one piercing her heart with a new wave of hurt and humiliation. Determined to regain some semblance of control, Lena threw herself into adapting to her new surroundings. She learned to navigate the cobbled streets in her wheelchair, though each journey was a test of endurance and strength. She began helping Anna with small tasks around the house, mending clothes, preparing meals, anything to feel useful. Over time, she became familiar with the rhythms of the village, learning which paths were easiest to travel, which neighbors were friendly, and which places offered a rare moment of solitude. Her growing independence drew the attention of a few villagers who had previously kept their distance. One evening, as she rested on a bench by the village well, a young man named Joseph approached her. He was a quiet, thoughtful person, with a gaze that held both kindness and curiosity. He had heard her story from Anna and wanted to know if she needed any assistance. Grateful for the gesture, Lena began to open up, sharing bits and pieces of her life before the abandonment. Joseph listened with an intensity that made her feel seen, respected. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope, a reminder that she was more than just a woman abandoned by her husband. However, not everyone in the village welcomed her presence. There was a man named Victor, a stern, brooding figure who seemed to resent Lena's very existence. He would glare at her as she passed, muttering under his breath about outsiders and trouble. Victor's animosity was unsettling, and Lena couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more about Michael's departure than he was willing to share. One afternoon, as she wheeled herself down the main street, she overheard Victor speaking to another villager, his voice low but filled with contempt. "She'll bring nothing but trouble," he said, just like her husband did. Lena froze, her heart pounding as the words sunk in. What did Victor mean? Had Michael caused trouble in the village before? She wanted to confront Victor, demand answers, but fear held her back. Instead, she went to Anna, hoping the older woman might shed some light on the mystery. But Anna's expression grew guarded, and she avoided Lena's questions, insisting that it was better to let the past stay buried. Frustrated and hurt, Lena felt the weight of her isolation press down on her even more heavily. Days turned into weeks, and Lena's frustration grew. The villagers' whispers, the evasive answers, and the lingering sense of secrecy were wearing her down. She felt as though she were being suffocated by shadows, trapped in a labyrinth of unanswered questions. Yet she couldn't bring herself to leave, not yet. She needed closure, needed to understand the truth about Michael, about the man she had loved and trusted. Then, one evening, something strange happened. As Lena sat alone in Anna's modest home, a knock sounded at the door. Anna opened it to reveal an elderly man with a weathered face and piercing eyes. It was Rafik, the village elder who rarely left his secluded home on the edge of the forest. He was known for his wisdom and his knowledge of the village's history, but he rarely involved himself in the affairs of outsiders. Without a word, Rafik walked in, his gaze fixed on Lena. He took a seat across from her, his hands clasped together, and regarded her with a look that was both intense and compassionate. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Your husband," he began, "was not a stranger to this village. He came here many years ago, long before you met him." Rafik paused, letting his words sink in. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. She had always believed Michael's past was an open book, that he had no secrets, no hidden life. Yet here was Rafik, suggesting otherwise. Rafik continued, explaining that Michael had been involved with a group of men in the city, people who had connections to dangerous dealings. He had come to the village years ago, seeking refuge from the consequences of a choice he had made, a choice that had led him down a dark path. Lena listened, her heart pounding as Rafik painted a picture of a man she barely recognized, a man haunted by his past, running from shadows that had followed him even into their marriage. Michael tried to leave that life behind, Rafik said, his voice softening. He thought he could escape, that he could protect you from it. But the past has a way of catching up with us, no matter how far we run. Lena was stunned, her mind racing with questions. Had Michael brought her here to protect her from these men? Or was there something else, some deeper reason he had chosen to abandon her in this remote village? She felt a surge of anger, mingled with a bitter sense of betrayal. Why hadn't he told her? Why had he made this decision without her? Rafik looked at her, his eyes filled with sympathy. He thought he was doing the right thing, he said quietly. But sometimes, the right thing can still cause harm. He didn't want to burden you with his past. He thought leaving you here, where you would be safe, was his only option. Lena sat in silence, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She wanted to hate Michael for what he had done, for the pain he had caused her. But beneath the anger, there was a deep sadness, a sorrow that came from knowing that the man she loved had been fighting battles she knew nothing about. As Rafik rose to leave, he placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her a small measure of comfort. "The truth is a heavy burden," he said, "but it can also set you free. If you wish to find him, there may still be a way." With those words, he left, leaving Lena alone to grapple with the weight of everything she had just learned. The weight of Rafik's revelation lingered heavily in Lena's heart, each word replaying in her mind, amplifying the bewildering portrait of the man she thought she knew. Michael, the steady, dependable partner who had seen her through every hardship, had lived a life steeped in darkness she could never have imagined. Every act of kindness, every comforting smile he'd given her over the years, was now tinged with the shadow of this concealed past. How could she have been so blind, so unaware of the secrets that must have burdened his soul? Despite her shock and hurt, Lena's need to understand the truth became a singular focus, consuming her thoughts. She could no longer sit idly in the village, surrounded by whispers and half-told stories. If she was to find any semblance of peace, she needed to know everything. That night, as she sat alone in Anna's small kitchen, the dim glow of a single candle casting flickering shadows on the walls, she made a decision. She would find Michael. She needed to confront him, to demand answers, and perhaps to free herself from the chains of doubt and betrayal that now bound her. The following morning, Lena approached Rafik. The elderly man's face was a mask of concern as he listened to her plan. He tried to dissuade her, warning her that the path she was choosing was not only dangerous but would open doors to memories and truths that might be better left sealed. But Lena was resolute. She told Rafik that she had spent her entire life in the shadows, watching the world go by from the confines of her wheelchair, feeling powerless. She was done being passive, done letting others make decisions for her. Rafik, seeing her determination, finally relented. He leaned closer and revealed that Michael had connections with a man named Yuri, a former associate who had lived in the city nearby. Yuri was a man of questionable character, known for his ties to underground circles and a network of people who operated in the shadows. If Michael had indeed sought refuge, Yuri would know where he was, or at least where he had last been seen. But Rafik warned Lena once more. Men like Yuri did not operate by the rules of kindness or empathy. Whatever she discovered would come at a cost, and she needed to be prepared. Determined but apprehensive, Lena set out with Rafik's reluctant help. With some assistance from Joseph, the young man who had befriended her, she arranged transportation to the city where Yuri was known to stay. Joseph offered to accompany her, sensing the dangers of her journey, but Lena insisted on going alone. This was her quest, her burden to carry. She needed to face whatever lay ahead without leaning on anyone else. The city felt like another world after the quiet simplicity of the village. Its streets bustled with people moving in every direction, the air thick with the sounds of traffic, and the sense of food from street vendors. Lena's heart raced as she navigated the chaotic streets, feeling both vulnerable and emboldened in her wheelchair, a single woman seeking answers in a world that barely noticed her. After hours of asking around, following vague directions and casting anxious glances at every stranger she passed, she finally found herself outside a dingy, smoke-filled bar on the outskirts of town. The walls were lined with peeling posters, and a haze of cigarette smoke hung heavily in the air, mingling with the stale scent of alcohol. Her courage wavered momentarily, but she steeled herself and entered, her wheelchair gliding over the uneven floor as heads turned to observe the unusual sight of a lone woman in a wheelchair in such a place. She asked for Yuri, her voice trembling but resolute, and was directed to a shadowy figure at the back of the room. Yuri was a grizzled man, his face etched with years of hardship and shady dealings. His gaze was cold, calculating, as he looked her over with a mix of amusement and suspicion. "So," he drawled, lighting a cigarette and exhaling a cloud of smoke, "you're the wife Michael tried so hard to keep safe. I have to say, I didn't expect you to come looking for him." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. This man knew Michael possibly better than she did, and his words were laced with a knowing malice that unsettled her. She forced herself to hold his gaze, refusing to show any weakness. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice steady. "Why did he abandon me? I deserve to know the truth." Yuri chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "The truth," he echoed, as if the concept were a joke. "Truth isn't something that men like Michael and me deal in. But I'll tell you this, your husband's actions weren't just to protect you. He was running from his own mistakes, mistakes that couldn't be erased, no matter how many times he tried." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction as he continued. "Michael got himself tangled up in a debt he couldn't repay. Promises made, deals broken. When you marry a man like that, you're bound to get caught in the crossfire eventually. He left you because he thought disappearing would keep you safe. But people like him, they never stop running. He's out there somewhere, still hiding from his own shadows." The words struck Lena like a blow. She had come seeking closure, but instead, she felt as though she were slipping further into a pit of lies and deceit. She pressed on, her voice cracking slightly. "But where? Where is he now? I need to find him." Yuri hesitated, eyeing her carefully. For a moment, something softened in his expression, as if he saw something in her that reminded him of someone he'd once known. He leaned back, exhaling a long stream of smoke before finally speaking. "There's a small, abandoned building on the outskirts of town," he said quietly. "Last I heard, he was holed up there, trying to disappear for good. If you want answers, you might find him there. But don't expect him to be the man you once knew. A man running from himself is barely a man at all." Lena felt her heart pound as she listened, a strange mixture of fear and hope welling up within her. She thanked Yuri and left, her mind spinning with the weight of everything she had learned. She couldn't shake Yuri's warning, couldn't forget the image he had painted of Michael as a broken man, haunted and shattered by his own choices. That night, she made her way to the address Yuri had given her. The building was exactly as he had described, dilapidated, forgotten, a crumbling structure hidden in the shadows of a city that had moved on without it. She approached cautiously, her heartbeat echoing in her ears, her hands trembling as she maneuvered her wheelchair closer to the entrance. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the only sounds her own breathing and the faint creaks of the decaying structure. She pushed herself forward, each movement filled with both dread and anticipation, until finally she saw him. Michael sat slumped against the wall, his once strong frame now thin and frail, his face drawn and haggard. He looked up as she entered, his eyes widening in shock. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them, heavy with everything that had gone unsaid. Lena felt a surge of anger, hurt, and love all at once. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake him until he gave her every truth he kept hidden. But instead, she simply whispered, Why, Michael? Why did you leave me? Michael's gaze dropped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I thought I was protecting you, he murmured, his words filled with a brokenness that tore at her heart. But I was wrong. I was trying to protect myself, to run from a past that I should have faced. I didn't deserve you, Lena. I never did. As his confession hung in the air, Lena felt her anger fade, replaced by a deep sadness. She realized then that the man she had loved, the man who had once been her world, was as lost and broken as she was. They were both survivors, struggling to make sense of a life built on secrets and half-truths. In that moment, Lena knew that whatever came next, they would have to face it together. There was no running from the past, no escaping the shadows that lingered. But perhaps in facing it together, they could find some semblance of peace, some path to healing. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, her touch a promise that she would stand by him, even as they confronted the darkest parts of their lives. They were broken, but together, perhaps, they could find a way to rebuild. The silence stretched between Lena and Michael as they sat on the cold, cracked floor of the abandoned building, hands entwined in a fragile truce. Outside, the sounds of the city faded, leaving only the low hum of traffic in the distance. Time seemed to stand still, as if the world itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what would unfold between them. Lena studied Michael's face, searching for the man she had once known, the man who had promised to stand by her side forever. Now she could see only shadows of that person, a man haunted by regrets and decisions he'd never shared with her. Finally, Michael broke the silence, his voice a low murmur that trembled with the weight of confession. Lena, there are things I never told you, things I buried deep, hoping they'd never come to light. But in hiding them, I hurt the person I loved most. He paused, struggling to find the words, as though speaking them aloud would make the pain real all over again. You need to understand. Before we met, I was a different person, caught up in a life I thought I could leave behind. I made mistakes, Lena, mistakes that had consequences I couldn't escape. Lena clenched his hand, both afraid and eager to hear the truth. She needed answers, needed to know the depth of the betrayal that had torn her life apart. Michael continued, his gaze fixed on some distant point, lost in memories she couldn't reach. It started years ago, when I was young and desperate, he began, his voice thick with regret. I got involved with people who promised me everything. A way out, a new life, success beyond my wildest dreams. But it came at a cost. These people, they controlled me. And by the time I realized the price, it was too late. I was bound to them by secrets and debts I could never repay. He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening with a pain he could no longer hide. When I met you, Lena, I thought I could escape. I thought I could bury that life and start fresh. You gave me hope, made me believe that love could change everything. But those people, Yuri and his associates, they don't let go. They followed me, threatened me, and eventually, they threatened you. I tried to keep you safe, tried to shield you from the darkness of my past, but it became clear that they'd stop at nothing. Lena's heart twisted as she listened, each word slicing through her like a blade. She had thought herself safe in the cocoon of their love, unaware of the shadows lurking just beyond her sight. She wanted to scream, to cry, but she forced herself to listen, knowing this moment held the answers she had been desperate to find. Michael's voice cracked as he continued, his confession pouring out like a dam that had finally burst. They gave me an ultimatum, Lena. Leave you or watch them hurt you, I thought. I thought that by taking you to the village, I could keep you hidden, that they wouldn't find you there. I thought I was doing the right thing by disappearing, by becoming invisible. I told myself that if I stayed away long enough, they'd lose interest, that you'd be safe. He lowered his head, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But I was wrong. All I did was abandon the person I loved most. And for what? A life of running. of hiding like a coward. I should have faced them. I should have fought. But I didn't. I left you, Lena, because I was too scared to confront the mess I'd made of my life. Lena's hand shook as she processed his words. Anger surged within her, mingled with a deep sorrow she couldn't contain. The man she had trusted, the man she had loved, had not only betrayed her but had dragged her into a nightmare of his own making. Yet, as much as she wanted to hate him, she couldn't. Behind his broken confession, she saw a man who had been desperate, trapped by choices he could never undo. She took a shaky breath, fighting to control the emotions swirling inside her. "Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you should have told me. We could have faced it together. Instead, you left me alone, made me think you'd stopped loving me, that I was worthless to you." Michael looked at her, his eyes brimming with remorse. "I know," he choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was a fool, Lena, a coward. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was hurt you. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you, if you'll let me." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of his confession pressing down on them both. Lena felt torn, caught between the love that still lingered in her heart and the bitterness of betrayal that threatened to consume her. But deep down, she knew that she couldn't continue living in the shadows of his mistakes. She needed closure, a chance to rebuild her life with or without him. Taking a deep breath, she looked him in the eyes, her voice steady and resolute. "If we're going to move forward, I need you to make a choice, Michael. We face this together, or we go our separate ways. I won't live in fear, wondering if your past will catch up to us again. If you want my forgiveness, you have to confront these people, put an end to this once and for all." Michael nodded, his expression one of determination and relief. "I'll do whatever it takes," he vowed, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. "I won't run anymore. If you're willing to stand by me, I'll face them, no matter what it costs." Their conversation marked a turning point, a decision to face the consequences of his past together. But the path forward was fraught with danger. Michael's enemies were powerful, relentless, and they would not take kindly to his attempt to break free. Lena knew that by staying with him, she was risking her own safety, her own peace of mind. Yet something inside her refused to let go. She had come this far, endured so much, and the thought of giving up now felt like a betrayal of everything they had once stood for. Together, they devised a plan. Michael would arrange a meeting with Yuri, confronting him and the others, demanding an end to the torment that had plagued them for so long. Lena insisted on being there, despite Michael's protests. She needed to face these men, to see for herself the people who had cast such a dark shadow over their lives. It was a risk, but she knew that without this closure, they would never be free. The night of the meeting was tense, filled with a quiet dread that settled over them like a storm waiting to break. They arrived at the designated spot, a derelict warehouse on the outskirts of the city, hidden from prying eyes. Lena's heart raced as they stepped inside, the cold air prickling her skin, the silence thick with anticipation. Yuri was already there, flanked by two men whose expressions were hard and unforgiving. His face twisted into a smirk as he saw Michael, his eyes glinting with a cruel satisfaction. "So you've decided to face the music at last," he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "And you brought the wife. How touching." Michael stepped forward, his voice steady. "This ends here, Yuri. I'm done running, and I won't let you control our lives anymore. We're finished with this." Yuri chuckled, a cold, sinister sound. "You think you can just walk away? After all the debts you owe, all the promises you broke? No, Michael, the only way out is the way I choose." He glanced at Lena, his gaze turning predatory. "And maybe your wife should pay for your mistakes, just to make sure you understand the consequences." Lena felt a surge of fear, but she refused to back down. She held Michael's hand tightly, her gaze unwavering. "We're not afraid of you," she said, her voice filled with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. You don't own us. Whatever hold you had, it ends now." Yuri's smirk faltered, and for a brief moment, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Michael seized the opportunity, stepping forward with a defiance that surprised even himself. "You have no power over us, Yuri," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "We're done with your games, and if you come after us again, we won't be alone. I've already told people about you, about everything you've done. If anything happens to us, there are others who will come for you." The threat hung in the air, and Yuri's expression darkened. He looked from Michael to Lena, weighing his options. Finally, he stepped back, his face twisted with barely concealed rage. "You're making a mistake," he hissed, but there was a note of defeat in his voice. "You may have bought yourselves some time, but this isn't over." With that, he turned and stalked away, his men following closely behind. Michael and Lena stood in the silence of the warehouse, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. They had faced the darkness together, challenged the shadows that had haunted them, and for the first time, they felt the weight lift. As they left the warehouse, hand in hand, Lena looked at Michael and saw a glimmer of the man she had fallen in love with. They had both been broken, both scared by Thiers. Michael and Lena emerged from the shadows of the warehouse. The night air felt colder, sharper, yet strangely invigorating. It was as if the confrontation with Yuri had stripped away layers of fear and uncertainty, leaving them raw, exposed, and, paradoxically, stronger. They walked in silence through the dimly lit streets, their footsteps echoing softly. Each step felt heavy with the realization that they had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had chosen to stand against the darkness of Michael's past together, but what lay ahead was still shrouded in mystery. The next few days brought a strange, uneasy calm. Michael was vigilant, watching every corner, every shadow, as if expecting Yuri's vengeance to strike at any moment. But there was something different about him now, a resolve, a new sense of purpose. Lena saw it in the way he carried himself, in the way he looked at her, his gaze no longer clouded by guilt and shame. She knew that the journey to this moment had scared them both, but she also sensed that they were stronger for it, bound by the trials they had endured. Back in the village, they returned to Anna's small house, where the villagers greeted them with a mixture of relief and curiosity. Rumors had spread rapidly, tales of their journey to the city, of Michael's mysterious past, and of the confrontation that had taken place with Yuri. Some villagers were wary, casting glances filled with both fear and respect. Others offered tentative smiles, their silent way of acknowledging Lena and Michael's courage. They were outsiders no longer. Their shared struggle had earned them a place in the village, a place among people who understood hardship and the resilience required to survive it. Yet, even as they settled back into the rhythm of village life, Lena could sense that the calm was temporary. The shadows of Michael's past might have been confronted, but they hadn't disappeared. There was an ever-present awareness that Yuri or others like him might still be out there, watching, waiting for the right moment. This fear lingered, a reminder of the delicate balance they had achieved, a balance that could be disrupted at any moment. One evening, as Lena and Michael sat by the fire in Anna's home, Michael finally spoke about the future, his voice quiet but filled with determination. "We can't stay here forever, Lena," he said, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "This village has given us shelter, and Anna has been like family. But we can't keep hiding. We have to find a way to build a real life, one where we're not looking over our shoulders every second." Lena listened, her heart heavy with the truth of his words. She had grown attached to the village, to its peace and simplicity, but she knew Michael was right. This place had been a refuge, a temporary sanctuary, but it wasn't a home. They needed to forge a life that wasn't dictated by fear, a life where they could truly be free. She looked at him, her expression resolute. The days following their confrontation with Yuri brought a new and unexpected calm to Lena and Michael's lives. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they could breathe freely, no longer haunted by the specter of Michael's past. The relief was palpable, woven into their every interaction, their every quiet moment together. They moved forward cautiously, still wary of the possibility that Yuri's threat might resurface. But as weeks turned into months without any sign of him, they gradually allowed themselves to believe in the permanence of their newfound peace. Their small apartment, modest and simple, became a sanctuary, a place where they could finally focus on building a life rooted in the present rather than haunted by the past. Each room held memories of their journey, small reminders of the trials they had endured and the strength they had discovered within themselves. Lena hung photographs on the walls, capturing moments of laughter, quiet afternoons, and walks around the neighborhood, immortalizing the joy they found in each other's company. For them, it was these simple, unremarkable moments that held the deepest meaning, a reminder of what they had fought so hard to protect. In the following months, Lena poured her energy into her work at the community center. She became a passionate advocate for others facing physical and emotional challenges, driven by her own experiences and a desire to offer hope to those who, like her, had once felt lost and powerless. She led workshops, provided one-on-one support, and organized events to foster a sense of community. Her resilience and empathy inspired those around her, and it wasn't long before she became a cherished figure in the community, known for her warmth and unwavering determination. Meanwhile, Michael found himself growing at ease in his job as a mechanic. The physical work provided a grounding sense of purpose, allowing him to focus on the present, to rebuild himself through the simple, honest work of his hands. His reputation grew as someone who was reliable and skilled, and people came to trust him, admiring the quiet strength he radiated. He made friends with his coworkers, forging connections that had once seemed impossible during the days he spent running from his past. In those moments of camaraderie, he rediscovered the joy of ordinary human connections, the kind that required no masks, no secrets. As they both settled into their new roles, they began to make plans for the future. Dreams that had once felt out of reach now took shape, colored with hope and possibility. They talked about starting a family, about building a life where they could raise children in a world free from the shadows of Michael's past. They envisioned a home filled with laughter, a place of love and safety, a place where they could offer their children the stability and warmth that had eluded them for so long. But even as they looked to the future, Lena and Michael couldn't ignore the lingering effects of their journey. Their scars, both visible and hidden, were reminders of the struggles they had faced and the resilience they had forged in the fire of adversity. Lena, particularly, found herself haunted by memories of the days she had spent in the village, alone and abandoned. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, she would wake from dreams filled with images of narrow cobbled streets, of the empty silence that had once surrounded her. She would reach out for Michael in the dark, seeking reassurance in his presence, grounding herself in the reality of the life they had built together. One evening, as they sat together on their small balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Lena turned to Michael, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what happened?" she asked softly, her gaze distant. "About the choices we made to get here?" Michael nodded, his eyes fixed on the fading light. "Every day," he admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. What we went through, it changed us, but it also made us stronger. I don't want to live in the past anymore. I want to live in this moment with you." Lena smiled, taking his hand in hers. "I feel the same way," she whispered, squeezing his hand gently. "But sometimes, I wonder, if we could have done things differently. If I could have been stronger back then, if I could have seen the signs." Michael shook his head, his gaze filled with tenderness. "You were always strong, Lena. Stronger than I ever was. You were the one who kept us going, who held on to hope when I had given up. If anyone should regret their choices, it's me." They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the quiet understanding between them filling the space with a warmth that words could never convey. In that moment, they knew that they had finally found peace, not just with each other, but with themselves. They had faced their fears, confronted their mistakes, and emerged whole, bound together by a love that had endured every test. As time went on, Lena and Michael's lives continued to blossom. They became an integral part of their community, involved in events and activities that brought people together. They hosted dinners for friends, volunteered for local causes, and even organized charity events to support others in need. Their shared history of struggle and resilience had given them a unique perspective, a deeper empathy for those around them. People gravitated to them, inspired by their story, though few knew the full extent of what they had endured. One day, as they walked through the park, hand in hand, they noticed a young couple sitting on a bench nearby. The couple was locked in a heated argument, their voices filled with frustration and anger. Lena and Michael exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew the toll that anger and fear could take on a relationship, the way secrets could tear people apart. Without hesitation, they approached the couple, offering a listening ear, a few words of advice, and most importantly, a reminder of the importance of trust and honesty. That moment marked a turning point for them, a realization that their journey had not only been about survival but about growth, about learning to offer the strength and wisdom they had gained to others. They became mentors, guides for those facing their own battles, quietly sharing their story in small ways, allowing others to see that it was possible to overcome even the darkest of circumstances. Years passed, and Lena and Michael's family grew. They welcomed 2 children, a boy and a girl, and built a home filled with love and laughter. They watched their children grow, nurturing them with the compassion and resilience they had fought so hard to cultivate. The scars of their past remained, but they no longer defined them. Instead, they became reminders of a journey that had led them to each other, of a love that had survived the harshest of trials. In the quiet moments of their lives, Lena would sometimes look back on their journey with a sense of wonder and gratitude. She had been broken, abandoned, left to fend for herself in a world that seemed determined to strip her of her dignity. But she had found strength in that darkness, discovered a resilience she had never known she possessed. And in the end, she had not only found her way back to Michael, but to a life filled with purpose and meaning. One evening, as they sat together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard, Lena turned to Michael, her heart full. "We've come a long way," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. Michael nodded, his gaze soft as he looked at her. "We have," he agreed, his hand resting on hers. "And I wouldn't change a single thing. Not after everything we've built together." They sat in comfortable silence, their hearts filled with a contentment that words could never fully capture. They had faced their demons, conquered their fears, and emerged from the shadows stronger, braver, and more deeply in love than ever before. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their family and the peace they had fought so hard to create, they knew that they had finally found their way home.